Welcome back, and indeed we're now crossing to Angelo Fick, Director of Research at ASRI, as we continue to analyse the President's address this evening on what government has planned and the measures that they will be taking in order to try and stop the spread of coronavirus. A very good evening to you, Mr. Fick. Thank you so very much for joining us here on SABC News.
Good evening, Ms. Litwaba, and a good evening to you and to the viewers.
Now, you would have heard, of course, that, there's a travel ban now on foreign nationals coming from high-risk countries. We're given examples of Italy, Germany, China, the US. Can you talk to us about the international political ramifications that this could have, particularly for a country like ours that relies so heavily on some of these countries for trade, for instance?
So this is an international health emergency that has now been visited on us in South Africa. And I think it is important to remember that it is an international health emergency. And so this is not just about, how South Africa is going to respond. It's how South Africa is going to respond as part of a global response. And so the President's measures, I think, are in line with the World Health Organization recommendations, with the recommendations of various health departments in other countries. And it is really to prevent the epidemic status from hitting the South African population in a huge way that will then put pressure in the very early stages of this virus's existence on the planet and its infection of the human population, to put stress on the healthcare system now before we have a vaccine and before we can actually begin to manage with it. And so that's important. This is preventive measure, and this is to stop the virus from spreading too quickly.
Now, some had argued, and I've been watching just on social media, saying that, our government was perhaps slow to react. And, I was chatting to Azar Jamin shortly. The fact that, we watched China and how they quickly reacted. We saw, hospitals being put up to deal with the disease and so forth. From where you're sitting, do you think that our government could have been quicker, or is this timing and what's been said today the correct sort of timing in your mind?
I think we could have made these kinds of measures earlier, but it isn't going to impact too much, in my view, because it's not just about how government reacts. It is now that government has set the framework for all of us. It is now the duty of all 58 million South Africans to respond in terms of the World Health Organization guidelines as it is being promulgated by the South African government, and to self-monitor, self-isolate, and self-regulate in relation to those. And here, I think defiance against government promulgations is, I think, not in the interest of everybody. This is really the kind of health challenge where all of us have to stand together, or we will all perish together. Somebody recently said, one of the health professionals recently said, that you're only as protected as the most vulnerable person in your society in the case of a pandemic like this. And so there can no longer be divisions of class, divisions of political belief, divisions of region. We all have to work together.
Now, you mentioned the fact that we should all stand together, and that was very one of the crucial points that the President did raise as he was addressing the nation this evening. What are we expecting to hear from political parties, opposition parties, who ordinarily would be against what the government is sort of proposing? Do you think at this point that, opposition parties will stand in sort of solidarity, I suppose, with the President and say, we stand with him on this? Because there's certain things where this is perhaps a time where, as you say, everybody should be uniting. Do you think that we will see that level of, I want to say maturity, perhaps is a better word to use here, but will we see that level of maturity where we see political leaders, of other political parties saying, you know what, we actually stand with the President and this is what we will be doing in order to help, the government to move forward with these plans?
Well, this is going to be a test for all political parties and, in fact, for all organizations in South Africa, not whether or not they support the particular measures that are indicated by the President, but whether they are willing to push the President and government further than he's gone so far. These measures are not adequate. They are, for the moment, appropriate. But we could be going further with these measures, and that would require opposition parties. The test for opposition parties will therefore be whether or not they hold citizens' interests over political point scoring in their gaze and whether they stand on the side of citizens rather than simply balk at a political idea or project because it comes from the African National Congress or because it comes from President Ramaphosa and his government. These measures, I think, good as they are, should be taken further and will have to be taken further in the weeks ahead. Because the disease is going to develop, we are going to get it, we are going to have to cope with it, and the consequences are not just going to be economic, they're going to be social. Because if people cannot go to work, services will start slowing down, people will not be able to access certain things, including stores, should the disease impact be severe, and in that case, our ability to cooperate to keep one another alive and invade social stability is going to be tested. And so it now requires all political parties to put cheap point scoring aside and to argue for the philosophical and humane positions that are required to push government ahead and further on this policy.
You know, we're in the crisis right now, and of course that's where all the attention will be focused on. And I mean, I suppose it will be all good and well for some people who will enjoy the fact that perhaps they don't have to go into work. But I want us to talk about what you expect after all of these, the after effects of the coronavirus. I mean, we're bound to have situations where we have businesses, for example, who are saying, because of the virus, we simply couldn't make money. We simply have to shut down. And now this means that we have to let go of staff, for example. I mean, when you look at the after effects, Mr. Fick, what are you looking at?
We're looking at having to rethink political organization of our society, and not just in South Africa, but globally. Because business as usual, we cannot return to if you have a population that has been affected at the individual level by weakened immune systems or weakened lungs or weakened bodies. You cannot then return to business as usual when people are grieving for the large numbers of people who will have perished. The Chinese example is setting the tone. We should be looking at societies that are severely affected by this and looking at the challenges they face and preparing ourselves for them. And I think a more humane response is going to be required rather than a more, shall we say, profit-driven response. So business as usual in the literal sense will not be possible, and business as usual in the metaphorical sense will not be possible. This is the first major health challenge that is going to threaten the society of human beings on Earth this century. We have to learn early how to respond to it, preemptively and proactively. And in the consequence of this, we may have to think and radically rethink how we engage with one another as human beings, how we live on this planet together, and at what cost. And so we're going to have to rethink social networks. We're going to have to rethink the nature of work. We're going to have to rethink the notion of remuneration. And it won't happen easily, and it certainly won't happen without resistance. But it is going to be necessary if we are to think at all of surviving in ways that are vaguely like the ways we live now.
All right. Angelo Fick, thank you so very much for giving us your time here on SABC News.